So welcome students, we're going to be talking today about double shifts and price ceilings and price floors or price control when the government gets involved. So let's go through a little bit what we're going to try to accomplish today, and I'm going to give you some practice before we meet again. So the first thing we're going to learn as we talk this through is explain how when we have double shifts, explain how price equilibrium and quantity equilibrium are affected, because I told you that's where all the questions end up being, is what happens to price and to quantity. So when we have a simultaneous shift, we've been doing just demand or just supply and watching what happens. Now we're looking at double shifts. So we'll see what happens there, and we'll explain when we have price controls or government intervention on the price where the market's trying to clear, how that can create inefficiency in the market. And then in all cases in economics, there's always winners and losers when any kind of change happens in the market. So we're going to go through each one of these. First thing we're going to talk about is double shifts, and that was still in your reading towards the end of Unit 7, but these are going to be some of your more difficult. We'll practice this a lot, don't worry, but I just want to introduce it to you really quick. So we'll do a practice one with the demand for milk is going to shift, so it's an increase, so an overshift and right, at the same time as production technology improves. So that sounds like a supply shifter, and that's shifting to the right. So we're going to use analysis, and in the end, after both the shifts, see what happens to price and quantity. Here's the rule. Whenever you have a double shift, something's going to be indeterminate. It's either going to be price or quantity. But because you have the up, down in one and left, right in the other, you need to be able to draw them out separately to help you see them. So I'll show you. If you were just drawing this all in one, unless you were drawing it absolutely perfect, it might be hard to see that. So let's kind of look at that. So we're going to do a demand increase and a supply increase at the same time, double shift. So we got a right shift of demand. As you can look at this, you can see price went up, quantity went up. Now let's do the increase in supply. Another shift, new equilibrium, and here we have price coming down with the rightward shift in supply and an increase in quantity. So we would look at this, and because it's drawn perfectly, we can easily see price really didn't change. It's indeterminate is the word that we use, because we can't really determine with the information we're given what happened, but we can clearly see the supply increased because, that the quantity increased because it went to the right in both of those. So the trick to that is to draw both out. Even if you're doing a little multiple choice test, draw out these little bitty graphs and you'll see it. It'll keep you from making mistakes, and I'll show you what I mean. So let's do this. With the rightward shift in supply, we can see price went up, quantity went up. And remember those little arrows I told you to draw to the outside? That'll help you too. Then we're going to do the demand increase. We can see how the opposite happened. Price went up, but quantity still went up. So when you put them together, it makes it a lot easier to see. Price is indeterminate because it went up in one and down in the other, but for sure, quantity increased. Let's do another one. What if supply increases and demand falls? So draw these really quickly in your notes so you can see it. With me? Okay. All right, so first we're going to do the supply increase. That's going to be a rightward shift, so we can see that the price goes down, quantity clearly goes up, and then when we do a leftward shift on demand, we have our price coming down and quantity going down. So what do we end up with both? Price decreased in both scenarios for sure. Quantity indeterminate because it went left in one and right in the other. Let's do another practice. Draw this one. Two quick little graphs, have them drawn out, draw your equilibrium, and then do a supply decrease in one and a demand decrease in the other and see what happens. So you could pause the video if you need to, but we have a leftward shift on supply, so price went up, quantity went down. Then for demand, we have a leftward shift, so price went down and quantity went down. So in the end, price was indeterminate but quantity clearly decreased in both of those. So that's the trick when you're doing these analysis. Very quick little lesson here, so we're not going to spend a whole lot of time, but it's the practicing. Drawing the two will help you get the answer right every single time. And we're going to shift to price controls. I got a nice little video that I'm going to share at the end for you to watch if you want a little bit more out of Crash Course. And normally, if we were in the class, I would take a poll. Like, how many of you want to see the price set on gasoline? It can never go above $2 a gallon. A lot of people say, yeah, and then I never have to worry about it. But do you think there could be some problems if the market's not allowed to work? Could we possibly lose some suppliers willing to supply to the market and end up with shortages? Okay, so you have to kind of, as economists, we like to kind of think this through. We say, Whenever we're not letting it clear where it wants to and just letting it move where it needs to as the market commands, we're going to end up with inefficiency, and I'll show you that. So price ceilings are an artificially low price. Okay, and a good way to remember these is nothing can happen above the ceiling and nothing can happen below the floor. So if we were in the room, I'd be stomping on the floor and saying nothing can go below the floor. So we'll look at both of these and it'll help you kind of remember those. Okay. So the maximum legal price a seller can charge for a product. Right now, the market's wanting to clear at $4, but in comes the government and shuts off the market. So it's at $2. So actually on your paper, I would tell you, shade that area above $2 because nothing can happen there. The market is cut off from there. All right, so now we have, instead of it, we get in a quantity equilibrium, we see that we have more demanded than we have supply. So we have a shortage. Okay, same thing we learned about last class. So we get inefficiency in the economy. Okay, when we have price floors, this is an artificially high price. Okay, and it uses the example of corn. I could also use the example of minimum wage. Same thing happens. Okay, all right, so here we have the government intervening. So when there's a floor, nothing can happen below the floor. So if you're drawing this, kind of scratch out that area below $4 because it's illegal. Nothing can happen there. The market's saying $4 is the minimum legal price that it can go out. So this is where government gets in, usually protective to protect the market, or in cases like minimum wage. It's a great example. But we end up with a surplus, meaning more supply than we have demanded. And you can imagine this if we were talking about employment and minimum wage. We have, in this case, suppliers are the people. Like we are the labor force. Yeah, we're willing to supply our labor at that higher price. But in that case, for demanders, that would be a flipped market. Now we're talking about the business owners. Well, there's fewer of them that can afford to pay that. So we get into employment markets and talk about that a little bit, but I just wanted to get you to think about that other than just corn. It's in other things we're going to be learning about as well. Does it help producers? Does it help people that are on minimum wage? It's always good intention, but usually it causes, in this case, it causes a surplus. When we have a surplus in the labor market, that's called unemployment. So here's a couple of practice questions. You can pause the video right here. Okay, so number one, which of the following will occur if a legal price floor is placed on a good below its free market equilibrium? Okay, so a price floor is artificially high. Remember, nothing can happen below the floor. And if AP's going to try to trick you, this is where they'll do it. So if the price floor is below its free market, well, they can do that, but it's not affecting the market. It's not binding, is how we would say. So equilibrium price and quantity will remain the same. In other words, market's still getting to do what it wants. Where it's clearing, if you price it below there, if the government comes in and says, this is the price floor, it's not affecting the market. Nothing can happen below the floor. It's not shutting off the market. Okay, so it's not a binding price floor. And the next one, which of the following statements about price control is true? And you should see price ceilings and price floor result in misallocation of resources or inefficiencies. Okay, so before we finish up today, I'm going to have you do these two to the best of your ability. So you know my rules. I don't want you staying up till 2 or 3 o'clock trying to figure this out. I want you to go through each of these. It should be somewhat easy for you. Most of it is just kind of thinking through. 1.6b is pretty good. It talks about the Zika virus, and then you get some practice with the drawing. When you draw these, just draw them in your notes. Don't have to print this out unless you just really, really want to, but it's not necessary to draw these out. Draw them in your notes. So I will put 1.6c, practice sheet, draw out those graphs, do them in pencil. If you make a mistake, who cares? When we meet again, that's going to be the very first thing that we do. So hope you're enjoying a good weekend, and I will see you next class.